apologizing that I can't sing and I can't dance. Great music that we had before, but I'll do the best that I can. And let me thank UNI International for bringing unions from all over the world here to Philadelphia. If there has ever been a moment in modern history where we need international worker solidarity, this is the moment. And it is the moment because never before in human history have so few people owned so much. Never before in human history has there been such massive levels of income and wealth inequality. Never before in history have we had such extraordinary concentrations of ownership. Never before in history have we seen a ruling class with so much political power in country after country all over the world. And never before have we seen the unprecedented level of greed, arrogance, at the top. And our job internationally is to tell these corporate bandits that the world belongs to all of us, not just a handful of billionaires. I want to just mention I am not as familiar as I should be with what is going on economically and politically in many of the countries that you come from, but I do know something about what's going on here in the United States. And that is, in this country, 3 people, 1, 2, 3, own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 160 million people. And while these people have enormous economic power, tens of millions of people in this country struggle to put food on the table. Hunger here in the United States for children and others is a real issue. People are struggling to find affordable housing. We've got 18 million households in America that are spending over half of their limited incomes on housing, and we have almost 600,000 people who are homeless. Here in America, despite spending far more on health care than any other country, 85 million people are either uninsured or underinsured. Many of our people cannot afford the outrageous cost of prescription drugs. Child care is increasingly unaffordable, and our young people in large numbers cannot afford to get a college education, and if they do, many of them leave school deeply in debt. Our job, as loudly as we can, and if there's any message I want to convey to you this evening, is that with all of the new technologies that are out there, with all of the wealth that exists, it is not acceptable, and we have got to change the reality of so few having so much and so many having so little, and it is a trade union movement that is going to bring around that change. And while I'm sure the numbers differ in country after country, here in the United States, despite massive increases in worker productivity and an explosion in technology, the average American worker is making today $45 a week less than he or she did 50 years ago. You got that? After 50 years, after the explosions of technology that we have seen, after increased worker productivity, average worker is worse off. When I was a kid in this country, the expectation was that one breadwinner, in those days often the man, would be able to work 40 hours a week and earn enough money to take care of the family. Today, the overwhelming number of families in America need two breadwinners, and many of them are working outrageous hours. We have got to create an economy that works for all, not just the few. What's going on in the United States is going on all over the world. You know why people are angry all over the world? They're seeing the people on top do phenomenally well, while the working class struggles and poor people live in desperation. But it's not only income and wealth inequality, and why it is so important that we have international worker cooperation. Because what we are seeing is large corporations, by and large, are no longer just national corporations. The big corporations, companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and Apple, Amazon, and many, many others, they have holdings, as all of you know, in many parts of the world, and many of them are constantly on the lookout for the cheapest possible labor that they can find and for the weakest environmental standards. And what we have been seeing for many, many years is a race to the bottom. And let's be clear, we don't talk about this too often, but with this growing concentration of ownership, with people in this country owning tens and tens of billions of dollars, these people do not put their money under their mattresses. What they do often is invest in the political system, and in this country at least, they are able to buy and sell politicians. So you have a Congress which day after day ignores the needs of the working class and yet spends an enormous amount of time and energy protecting the wealthy and big corporations. In the United States, they are able to do this through what we call here super PACs. And a super PAC is simply an organization in which a billionaire can put hundreds of millions of dollars to elect those candidates who will represent his or her interest and defeat those candidates who stand for the working class. So when we fight for economic justice, we have got to take on corrupt political systems in the United States and around the world. Democracy is one person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections. And when we talk about concentration of ownership in the corporate world here in the United States and around the world, let us not forget the media. In the United States, eight large media conglomerates control 90% of what the American people see, hear, and read. And this kind of concentration of ownership is not unique to the United States. It is common throughout the world. Rupert Murdoch, for example. You all remember Rupert? He is the right-wing billionaire who owns many major media outlets in continent after continent. And in many respects, the major function of the corporate media is to deflect attention away from the reality of people's lives and prevent a true understanding of what and why things are the way they are. In the United States, for example, again, I can't speak about the rest of the world, you could watch television for weeks and months, and the phrase working class will never be mentioned. Working class will never be mentioned. Just so happens that the working class is the vast majority of people in this country. But the media goes out of its way to deny the reality of class. So in America, we are all one happy family. We are Marx's classless society. You didn't know that we achieved that. But if you listen to media, there is no working class that has interests. There is no ruling class that has interest. Not discussed at all. So when we talk about bringing about the changes that we need, I beg of you, pay attention to media and fight to create media around the world that represents and reflects the needs of the working class. I wanted to just say a few words about some of the concerns that I have as we look into the future. And there are a couple of issues that stand out to me. All of you are aware of the terrible COVID pandemic that we have gone through. In this country, we've lost over 1 million people. Worldwide, at least 6 million people lost their lives. And if the pandemic has taught us anything in a crystal clear manner, it is about income and wealth disparities. It was not the CEOs of large corporations who, by and large, were getting sick and dying during the pandemic. They were able to isolate themselves in their lovely homes and in their offices and do their work on their computers. It was the working class of this country and of people all over the world who had no choice. They could not stay home and isolate themselves. They had to go to work in order to feed their families. And those are the people who died. They were the nurses and doctors and warehouse workers and factory workers and police officers, firefighters, bus drivers, hotel workers, food service workers, and many, many others. They did not have the luxury of being able to stay home and isolate themselves from the virus. They had to go to work, and many of them paid the supreme price for having to do that. And we will never forget the sacrifices they made to maintain the global economy. They are true heroes and heroines. And at the same time, while tens of millions of workers became sick during the pandemic and millions died, during the first 2 years of the pandemic, the world's 10 wealthiest men more than doubled their fortunes from $700 billion collectively to more than $1.5 trillion. So while people were suffering and dying, the very richest people in the world became much richer, and at the same time, the incomes of 99% of humanity went down, and an additional 160 million people were forced into poverty. So can you imagine the greed and the arrogance? People are dying, and in the midst of all of that chaos and pain and death, these people make billions more. And in the United States Senate, I am the chairman of a committee which deals with healthcare issues. And let me tell you, neither the United States nor most other countries are prepared for future pandemics which are likely. So we have got a lot of work in front of us, not only to do our best to prevent the next pandemic, but to make sure that if, God forbid, it comes, we will not see millions of workers dying in the process. And there is another major issue, as all of you know, that must be dealt with, and that is climate change. And once again, as the world becomes hotter, as we see more heat waves, drought, floods, forest fires, and extreme weather disturbances, and in my own state last month, we had the worst natural disaster, the worst flooding that we have had since 1927. But as we see all of the extreme weather changes, once again, it will be the working class of the planet that suffers the most, not the wealthy. Our job, therefore, is not only to combat climate change and dramatically cut carbon emissions, but to create many millions of jobs around the world as we move to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. With good planning, we can create a global economy which is clean, non-polluting, and makes our economies stronger, not weaker. Climate change is not an American issue, it's not a Chinese issue, it's not a European issue. It is an international issue. And as part of the effort to combat climate change, we need international cooperation. We do not need here in the United States or in China or other countries to be spending tens of billions of dollars more on the military. We need to bring the world together so that we can combat climate change as one planet, as one people. There's another issue out there, not just pandemics, not just climate change, but an issue all of you are becoming more and more familiar with, and that is the explosion of new technologies and artificial intelligence. It seems to me that these technologies have the potential to cause great harm for working people as machines and robotics and artificial intelligence transform workplaces all over the world. Make no mistake about it. The jobs that many people have today are not going to be there in 10 years or 20 years. So this revolution in technology can do a lot of harm. Or, on the other hand, it can be something which is extraordinarily positive. The good news is that if together we fight to make sure that the new technologies being created benefit workers and not just the CEOs of major corporations, there are unlimited possibilities as to what we can accomplish. With robotics and artificial intelligence, worker productivity will be increased. And the increased productivity must benefit the workers of the world and not just the owners of that technology and the corporations who buy that technology. And what does all of that mean? I will tell you what it means. If you got machines now that increase worker productivity, we can substantially reduce the work week for the average worker so that person has more time for leisure, for education, for families. Here in the United States, for example, for the last 80 years, it has been assumed by law that the 40-hour work week is the legal definition of full-time work. We can and must think about reducing that work week substantially and give workers the opportunity to fulfill their potential in every respect. And taking it a step further, throughout world history, from the inception of humankind, people have had to struggle. They've had to struggle to put food on the table to support their families in whatever country, in whatever part of the world. We now have, through this technology, if we use it appropriately, if it works for us and not just the few, we now have the potential to take a giant step forward in eliminating poverty, lowering the work week, and improving the standard of living of every man, woman, and child on this planet. And while, of course, there is much concern about the economy of today, there is also, here in the United States, some very good news. And that is, in this country, and I suspect around the world, in response to all of what we have seen in recent years, in response to that greed and income and wealth inequality, what we are seeing is workers standing up and fighting back in a way we have not seen in decades. In the United States, more workers today want to join unions. They are joining unions. Workers in unions are standing up and negotiating excellent contracts. They are prepared to go out on strike. And I just want to say a word of congratulations to the Teamsters. We've got some Teamsters here. These guys have just signed one of the best contracts we have seen in recent American history, which got over 80% support from their membership. They stood up, they fought back, and they won. Thank you, Teamsters. Right now in this country, we're seeing the United Automobile Workers, the UAW, standing up and fighting back against the big automobile manufacturers in a way that we have not seen happen in a very long time. Interestingly enough, the union organizing efforts are not just blue-collar workers, not just factory workers. They are white-collar workers and they're workers in between. Right now, we are supporting a strike in New Jersey where 2,000 nurses are out on strike demanding decent pay, decent working conditions for their patients. We are seeing in this country young people in graduate school who have been exploited for years by major universities organizing all across this country and winning good contracts as they teach the young people of America. We are seeing writers and actors in the entertainment industry stand up and fight back and are right now on strike for decent wages and working conditions. And we have seen strong union activity at companies such as Apple, Sega, Activision Blizzard, Google, and many, many others. The working class of this country, and I expect the world, understands precisely what is going on. And let me just conclude by suggesting this. And again, I'm more familiar here in the with what's going on here in the United States than many of your countries. But I will tell you, in my judgment, change here in the United States is going to come because respect and support for the establishment is getting weaker and weaker. The question that we are dealing with here and around the world is what that change will look like. Will it be a change which leads us to authoritarianism? Will it be a change which pits one group of people in a country, whether they are minorities, whether they are immigrants, whether they are black, whether they're Latino, whatever they may be, against other groups? Will it be change based on bigotry against the gay community? Is that the kind of change we will see? Or, with the leadership, and this is an enormous responsibility on your shoulders, because more than any other institution in the world, you can do it. Or will that change be based on the principles of love and compassion and international solidarity? Will it be based on the principles of economic justice, racial justice, and social justice? I know which side I am on in that struggle. I know which side you are on. Let's go forward together. Let's do it. Thank you all very much.